Hello and welcome to the ICT Pulse podcast. I'm Michelle Marius, your host and the editor and publisher of ICT Pulse, the online platform where we discuss ICT issues from a Caribbean perspective. Welcome to our February 2021 community chat. Joining me today are Gisselle Ramsaran, who is a digital marketing system specialist who is based in Trinidad and Tobago. And we also have Vincentius Kenswil, who wears many hats. One of them is Innovation Igniter at Creative Hub Caribbean in Suriname, and it is a cluster of companies with a mission to develop the creative technology ecosystem in the Caribbean. And we also had Vincent on our podcast a few years ago where we were talking about Suriname and various things related to the ICT and tech space there. Gisselle and Vincent, welcome to the podcast.
Yes, thank you, Michelle.
Hi, Michelle. Morning, morning, Vincent. Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, in this community chat, our guests submitted topics for discussion, and the first one is how can we transform a CARICOM-wide education system using ICT, which Vincent will lead us through. And then we will talk about managing business operations while adopting technology, which Gisselle has submitted for discussion. So, Vincent, you're up to bat first. And, what has been the experience and observations you have made in Suriname as it relates to the education system, leveraging ICT, and the concerns that you have?
Yeah, okay, thank you. Indeed, from the Suriname perspective, in fact, years we are talking about we have to transform our educational system to a more system that our students, our talents can be more applicable in the not only the business but in society, and mainly to focus on in our region, the Caribbean region, because for years we in Suriname, when you have an education and you are very good, you want to go to Europe and mainly Holland, because that is where our let's say motherland is in previous times. But what we have seen the last year, and because of COVID, we have to our education system is struggling seriously, and it is worldwide. But in Suriname, since April last year, schools are partly closed, and about 150,000 students, ages 4 to 18, they have limited access to education. And while we were trying in April last year to support schools, we found that just from the business side, we found that from the policy, this from the ministry, but also in the school themselves, they weren't ready to use the technology that is available. And they were very scared to use it, and they waited for the normal again, waited when COVID was gone, and then we can open the schools again. Okay, that is in fact all over the world a problem. But then I was thinking that if we need to transform our educational system, and a system that where our talents will learn and will get mentored to get an education from a CARICOM perspective. So we are in one region, and um, we have the same struggles. We can do that with the ICT technology very easily, because if from, let's say, we are making one system, one educational system, where every country, every area have their little bit own space, but the main let's say the main what they are learning, the main system is is on the is on the CARICOM. Then I think that we can develop the region at a better pace, because all of our countries have not the economy of skills, also not for education. So that is I think it is something we're talking about, and I think that from the business side we have to invest more into education. From Suriname, education is something that the government has to do, and we are waiting for the results of that system, and then taking those youngsters in our companies, and then we see, hey, you need to learn a lot more than I was expected. So I want to start that conversation in the Caribbean, and I know it will take. It is a big thing, and maybe some of you will think it will never happen because we already tried it like 10, 20, 30 years ago. But COVID learned us that it is necessary.
Absolutely. Giselle, why don't you jump in, and then I'll probably add my little 2 cents thereafter.
Sure. Vincent, this is such an interesting topic because when I think about how it sort of intersects at points with what I am thinking about and what I'm focused on, at both ends, it really is kind of looking at all of the different parts of the strategy. And just like business strategy, education itself and the structure of education has a strategy. And, we started because of COVID, when COVID sort of hit the Caribbean in March 2020, we were all forced to kind of adopt quick technology solutions to be able to adapt. And I thought we did that really well. There were easy solutions at our fingertips that we could find for education. We had things like, everybody jumped on that Zoom bandwagon, but there was also stuff like Google Classroom available. So we had easy technology tools, but when we thought about it later on, when we realized, I think that we're kind of in this thing for a longer haul than we expected. I feel that that's when the gaps in the system really started to appear. Because now we had, just like you said, you have a large segment of the Surinamese student population without access to this type of online technology to facilitate ongoing education. And we have the same thing happening in Trinidad. And I'm sure the same thing happens in Jamaica and in other territories in the Caribbean. So I think if we're looking at any kind of technology adoption for education across the Caribbean region, we have to kind of take a step back and try and fill some of those process gaps that could help to see a better dissemination of that kind of online system. But Vincent, I'm always happy when people say we have to kind of try again, because I know we've talked about reform of the education system in the Caribbean for such a long time, and it's a conversation that keeps getting regurgitated, and we never really finish it. But I think that this is the best opportunity for us to kind of tackle education reform in the Caribbean. I feel like a good place to start is kind of looking at the way that we structure this test based selection for placement, and starting with the primary school level with secondary. That SEA secondary entrance examination, how do we restructure that? And I know that in Barbados, they were thinking of scrapping the SEA. And I feel like that's a good place to start because we're working already with a system that has its limitations and clearly has been having some negative impacts. And if we try to just adjust with some of the existing structures in place, I feel that that's going to limit us.
Yes, the reform indeed, and but what I want to emphasize also is that because that was the in Suriname what I experienced is that from it sometimes it is not only the limitation of the limited access to the internet that is the problem, but only indeed what you say, the adoption of that technology in the system. And I think that indeed it is something that we have all over the Caribbean, because we Caribbean people we like to see each other, and also we cannot imagine the online vibe yet at that, at the pace that I think that in Europe or in other places of the world they are doing that. But the discussion is indeed that the reform of the education system, what we want to do is that in every territory we want to invest, and the IDB and all of those big in international funding society of organizations, they want to fund the money. But if you can put it on one pile and say as a Caribbean, listen, this is the basis that indeed like primary school needed, and we can learn from each other more, and it is like a very let's say, let me talk about, because Suriname, and we are part of CARICOM, and indeed I was already in this show uh, introducing Suriname, and we are like a little bit outsider because we are speaking Dutch. We have a little bit different system, but then again, we see that because of COVID, we are hit the same as the whole CARICOM. We are also a little bit relying on tourism. And indeed, we have that oil boom now, like in Guyana, but that is something that will come only in 4 or 5 years, and only for a very small amount of people. And most of the benefits will not benefit our region, because we know how oil is working for the last 100 years or so. So it is indeed a very challenging topic, but I, I, I'm also want to know, what do we see as the pros of such a unified system, and what can be the cons of it, and I'm I'm more optimistic to see that the pros are that we will indeed come together as one CARICOM family. In If we start now, then our children of in 10, 15 years will understand CARICOM and our region maybe better. Also, our history, the stories we have the same stories. The cons can be that that leaders will have to share their power. That's the only thing I see. But I don't know. Maybe what you see about that challenge?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there, Vincent. I think culture is really maybe one of those hurdles that we'll have to overcome. That even though you're right, we do share some of the same stories, the way that those stories are kind of told and experienced in our own nations individually, that differs a little bit. So I think we have to build a system that can be unique to a new set of experiences. I think that this is an opportunity to not build on the old, but maybe to just, this is an opportunity to just blow it apart and start afresh with something that, doesn't have the underpinnings of all of those sort of historical things that might have impacted it and those old cultural things that might have impacted it. But we start new and build something that we can grow on from here. But I also think too that infrastructure plays a huge role in this, and or infrastructure, and just like you indicated, Guyana is now at a point where they're going to be experiencing a boom and a change in their economy and a change in their overall national infrastructure. So they're going to be growing and probably surpass very quickly some other territories who may be a little ahead of them. So now we're going to see a lot more room for growth and adoption of technology in places like Guyana. But what does that mean for other places where you don't have that opportunity to have that infrastructure to support technology adoption? And I think if we're building a system that we want to see universally applied throughout the Caribbean, we also have to figure out how could we contribute to helping some of those underserved areas develop better infrastructure to be able to manage with this, because I see this as a holistic growth opportunity for the CARICOM. And if we're doing that, I know you talked about a shift in power, but it also has to be a shift in how we think about accountability. It's not just accountability to a single island and one population, but maybe extend that accountability and really think universally about growing the Caribbean, growing CARICOM, and all of us as one. And that has to be a how can we help to impact growth in the infrastructure to facilitate this technology adoption?
Yes, that's so true, and I think I'm also indeed a part of or member of the Canto. I don't know if you know the Canto, but that's the
Yes.
Caribbean, yes, sir. And they are also the last years indeed focusing on infrastructure. But I think that the infrastructure is, and I think that you mean by infrastructure is the accessibility to that ICT technology and mainly connectivity.
Yes.
Um, that is, I think that it is pretty good. I don't have the numbers, but maybe Michelle can help us on that, because I think for my field that we are already connected very well in the Caribbean, and that's why I in that you made a great point on not building a whole new set of experiences, and that is something indeed a little bit, not I shall not say new, but indeed I didn't look at it from that way. I was like, okay, we have those stories of our history, and we can use those stories to make them a little bit more appealing for our success, because I can speak of Suriname, for example. As you know, we have a lot of ethnic groups in Suriname. Um, we have the of African descendants, but also from India, from China, from Indonesia, from Holland. We also have, and all of those groups have has their own stories, and the story of the Africans and sometimes also the Indians are. What we have learned in the education system is that it was not such a good story because it was told from another angle. And what you're saying is break that down, leave it where it is, and start a new one, but with a Caribbean view. And I think that can be. It will take some time, but it with ICT technology, because we are connected, we can connect those stories a little bit easier. I think, as you know, in Trinidad, you have that big animation. And creativity 5 now. I think you know about the anime Carib. You are also part of that. And
Mhm.
what we have feel, and from that festival, I've learned so much about all the other countries in the region, Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, Guyana. That for me it was like, okay, this is something we can use also for our youngsters and put in the system. And I think that um, and that is maybe something that you were talking, or is your topic about the business operations, is that the CARICOM business leaders needs to invest more in our own region. I don't feel that that is happening um,
Mhm.
at the scale that we can develop it. So I think that there can lie a solution to call all the business people of the Caribbean and try to support not only CARICOM, because I believe in CARICOM. I don't know for you, but I believe in it.
Yeah, I think, you made a really solid point there, Vincent, with relation to getting the private sector involved. Sometimes, we all know from the simplest of things like getting your passport renewed or your license renewed, that sometimes it takes a little longer for that um for the public sector engine to turn, and the private sector engines can turn a lot faster. They can innovate faster. They can, arrive at decisions faster. And they may be probably the best opportunity for us to kind of drive this shift that you're talking about, and this kind of collaboration along the education lines. So that may very well probably be a good place to start getting more private sector involvement.
The point you indeed, Giselle, that is something that is the path I want to walk, because we are focusing. The Western world learned us that economy, that is the thing. Through economy, you are going to develop your region and do a lot of things. But I think that what we have missed in that, before we go to the economy, you have to educate your people at a certain way, and you have to educate them with the narrative of your region. And in our education system, when I talk about the education system, I can only speak for Suriname, because that is what I experience, is that the narrative of our education system is based on what they know in the Western world, you know. And that is what we are, that we with that narrative, we want to develop it. um our region is a little bit different. I like this story about, the for example, let's take the North European countries. There you have those seasons, and you have the summer, and then you have the winter, and those all the autumn, and all of those things. If you don't work hard in the summer, and you make sure that you have enough to survive in the winter, you will not survive the winter. So you will have to work very hard in the summer, take a break in the winter, make sure you have all of those things. But in the Caribbean, we don't have that challenge. We can live from day to day, because if, okay, one day you have that hurricane season that is very devastating, but normally you can live on day to day basis. You know what I mean? So it's
Yes.
a very fundamental set of other way of thinking, and maybe people will say, okay, this is a really economy, that's the thing. But the point I want to make is that in the CARICOM, we focused very much on the single market and economy, and then we forgot that education and our narrative needs to be changed. So I like the what you're talking about, to build a whole new way of that system. And what I think that will be, what I want to bring in the discussion, maybe this vlog or podcast will start, that is that looking at it from a CARICOM-wide system, and where the private sector will invest more. And that is one thing that we are doing with the Creative Tech Hub Caribbean, is trying to give, and starting in Suriname, to search for those talents. And we are focusing on youngsters from the age of 12 till the age of 22. We are focusing on that group of youngsters, and trying to give them another narrative in how to look at our region, and be very pride of our region, where you're coming from. And instead of, if you're good, okay, go to the Holy Land, and that will be Holland and England and all. You know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Yes, yes. All right, let me just jump in because Vincent, you raised some good points, and from what I gather, there are two sets of things I want to just touch on. Because you spoke about, I guess, access, and I think connectivity generally in the region is good. Uh, but perhaps what on in terms of the deployment of the infrastructure, there may be challenges as it relates to whether or not, or the extent to which people have the means to connect to the infrastructure. So whether or not they may have like a simple mobile phone, but they may not have like a smart device or a computer, and therefore the extent to which they can leverage technology and leverage ICT is might be limited. But you're also talking about the quality of the education and the curriculum that is being offered. And I think that is a big issue as well. And the extent to which people and teachers, the education system has adopted the technology, especially since we're living through, COVID-19, where remote and distance learning has become the norm. And what basically has happened is that teachers are teaching the classes as they have done, but the children are no longer in front of them, and therefore the quality of their interaction, the extent to which the children probably feel sufficiently occupied, and various things like that, which you can no longer control since they're not physically in front of you, is limited. So the modalities and how you use the technology to teach, and I guess how you craft your classes ought to be changing, and that I think is something that perhaps people are not looking at. But also, Vincent, going to your point about the pros and cons of a unified system, technically we have one already, which is, I guess, CXC, Caribbean Examination Council, and the examinations that it administers. And so we can learn a lot of lessons, I think, from that. And I think one of the things is that probably once you start to look at a unified system, which is evident now in CXC, is that it becomes very structured because you're trying to ensure that there's consistency across all of the participating countries. And that, I think, inherently brings in some limitations, I would say, in how you teach and what you teach, and the, I guess, the sort of individuality and the flair that I think somehow came out through what you and Giselle were saying. I think that those things kind of get lost once you try to harmonize an approach across the region. I think I'll just stop there for now. Giselle, probably jump in first, and let me hear what your thoughts are.
No, Michelle, I definitely agree with you. And as you both were talking, in my mind, I kept going back to some of those two things. One is, like you indicated, we may have some of the general infrastructure in place, but access to it might be limited because folks may not have the type of digital device to enable them to unlock this access. And then the other thing is too, culturally, and Vincent talked about it as well, it may be difficult for us to immediately switch to this type of digital learning scenarios because of who we are as a Caribbean people. We're very social, we have always been very close to this type of in-person social interaction. And what is going to happen, I think, for this to work, we have to look at hybrid systems that will allow for an easier adoption of this kind of scenario. But also, like you said, Michelle, when you start thinking about how a consistent structure applies across so many varied countries, then you have to think about individual applications. And I think a hybrid system might be able to be fluid enough to be tweaked to apply individually, but still maintain some kind of universal structure.
Yes, and indeed, I agree on what you both are saying about that the connectivity maybe with the devices are a problem. But then I was also thinking, because we have learned that the school is like, okay, you have to go to school, and as a parent, your child is going to school, and you I don't have the numbers, but in Suriname, I think that parents, most of the parents, and it is, let's say, in the lower classes, they don't really help their children in or stimulating them with the school. So it is the school, okay, and that's that. Um, because that is how we are used to that system, and that is what I thinking that when there is another and I'm talking about CARICOM-wide, because I think that because of the economics of skills, it is it is sometimes not feasible for every country to do it on its own, and also not feasible for the private sector to invest, because how are you the private sector, when they invest, they need to get gain money again, or brand or something sometimes. And if I'm looking at Suriname, if the private sector want to invest in the education, it is very difficult for them to with that small market. So I think that if you're taking it a little bit bigger, you see that we are like 16 million people together. I don't know the numbers on the on how many are going to the school. And I'm talking about, when I'm talking about this, is about ages 4 to 18. So because I think we can start with that. um, the mindset of those parents we also have to change, and then you will see that they will use their what they have, their money, for those devices that are now limited. Because in Suriname, we've heard also from teachers that I cannot go online because I don't have a computer or if I don't have a smartphone. But at the end of the month, you will see them in line for to buy a pizza or a KFC, or every month or every week, for example. So how you are spending your money and looking at that education is something not only for your child and for yourself, but for the region. This it I know it is a little bit broad thinking, but what I want to put in the discussion is that the private sector, we are depending on those same human power who's in the school and on the same market, but we it looks like we are not willing to invest the whole yet. And I know it is difficult because governments don't listen too well to the private sector. For Suriname, it is the same, that they see the private sector as the ones who are making the big money. And yeah, I don't know how it is with all the other countries, but um, I'm pleading for through the education system, we are trying to see uh, to have a society that is um, I don't yeah, how do you say it, that through education, we know that through education we can develop, but it's still on those silos. And I know that CXC is there. I also followed it, but unfortunately, Suriname is not connected well, and that is one of the things that is with Suriname government. They 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 don't take the right steps yet to make it happen. And we are now trying through the private sector to connect with that system also. So it's a very challenging system, but the last year have learned us that COVID will stay there. I saw also a point about the vaccine. I think all if there will be a vaccine available, I think that still there will be a way on that the way we are living together will be different. So I don't know how you're looking at that, Giselle.
Yeah, that's also a very that's
Challenging.
also a very big wrench that is now being thrown into so many systems, on the public sector and on the private sector, and as it relates to education, but also business. Everybody is trying to figure out what the impact of this vaccine will be. And again, when you think about who we are as Caribbean people and how we love engaging and interacting with one another, and us being very social beings, it, we have to wonder how many of us are kind of going to fall back into our old routines. And will this mean that once a vaccine has been rolled out, will we be back to our brick and mortar systems as we were, in days of 2019? So that's also a very keen thing. I think we're all kind of looking at and waiting to see how that plays out.
Absolutely. Folks, I think we need to leave this topic. I mean, it certainly is something that we could continue to explore, and even just delving into whether or not, or the extent to which we should revert to going back to school, going back to a school compound consistently, and the role remote learning should continue to play. I think certainly those are things that we could explore at a later date for now. So let's just move on to the second topic, which, Giselle, how to manage business operations whilst adopting technology. What are you seeing? What are your thoughts, as a marketing system strategist, digital marketing system strategist. What are your thoughts, and what are you seeing?
So, Michelle, it's for me, I feel like I've been able to see both sides of the coin. I have spent the last 12 years working as a digital agency on the agency side of things, delivering digital solutions. And then now from October, I've been sitting on the client side of things, kind of seeing how those digital solutions are implemented, and also kind of having the perspective of this accelerated technology adoption that we were faced with when we hit, when COVID sort of hit the Caribbean in March 2020. And from the business side of things, when you look at it and you kind of look at what happened from between March 2020 to January 2021, we started almost like this quick and dirty phased approach to technology adoption. We started with things like getting those everyday easily available tools like Facebook and WhatsApp and sort of adapting those to our business needs. And then we started growing and getting websites out, and we started, you know, enabling websites with e-commerce facilities, and all of those things were great, and they were happening on the front end to be able to manage with this consumer shift. But then what was happening on the back end? And for me, kind of sitting on the client side and looking at what was happening, I realized that maybe we were not taking the best approach to this kind of technology adoption, at least not taking a long term approach. And that even though we're there checking the boxes on the front end and saying, yes, we're meeting the consumers where they're now shifting to, I think it takes some due diligence for us as business leaders to step back and say, okay, great, let's now work on building that internal business operation.
Vincent, you want to jump in before I share my thoughts?
I'm totally agreed. We had the same experience here in Suriname. That let's take as an example, the because of the shops were closed, and so you have the delivery companies, they popped up. And but indeed, a long term vision on that, on how you can, for example, uh, how to pay the our banking system, our online systems, they are not, how do you call it, ready for those things. People are still paying with cash, or and they have to stand in line to take cash on the ATMs or going to the bank. This, I totally agree that it hit us. But as businesses now, we have to look in our own system, and how to optimize that. I think it's a very good point, and it is important also to grow.
Indeed. And I mean, I think, Gisela, you said it correctly, the quick and dirty. And I think that is what has happened, in the sense that a lot of businesses just did what they felt they needed to do to survive, to get through the crisis. But what now is that two things? I guess clearly everybody who thought that we were returning to normal very soon or have probably been sorely mistaken. And after you do the quick and dirty, just to kind of tide you over, there should be the expectation and the hope that one would then do a more systematic approach to, fill in the gaps and to make whatever changes that you've made a bit more robust. But I think that is probably what you're seeing, that is not happening. And I wonder whether or not it comes from, well, a couple of things. As much as many companies probably are, have their head above water, they probably might just be able to, manage their expenses, and pay whatever costs that they have. But they may not necessarily have the disposable income or the general resources to do the more in-depth work that I think definitely needs to be done. And I wonder also whether or not, in some ways, we're still holding on to what might be the the normal, whatever that might mean. So we still haven't fully reconciled ourselves that things have irrevocably changed, and somehow whether or not people are hedging their bets that we can go back to 2019 life and lifestyle.
Yes, yes. And, this is where it kind of comes full circle to that last point when we were chatting about education and what could possibly happen and the impact of this vaccine. So it made me sort of remember an article that I had read about the recession in the US and how consumers shifted behavior during that time and switched brands. So they went from a lot of these more expensive brands to a lot of, the shop owned brands. Like we have Price Mart here, so they have a brand called Members Select. So you would switch from the usual Comfort or Downy and you'd switch to Members Select, for example, because it's a cheaper house brand. And you find that people do things like that during these difficult economic times. And you have to wonder whether or not when we're out of this sort of COVID crunch time, whether it's with a vaccine or if things sort of abate and allow us to get back out into the world, what's going to happen. And I think maybe businesses are also playing a little bit safe, waiting to see if this is going to happen, waiting to see what the impact of the vaccine will be. But Michelle, just as with any other kind of adoption, you will see some fall off. We have a fairly high mobile abandonment rate for mobile apps. So you find yourself downloading a lot of mobile apps and testing them, and then they have a very high abandonment rate. So it's the same thing when folks kind of go online, particularly the people who were not there originally. So they were forced to adapt and to make that shift. But then when they feel that maybe the need isn't as urgent for them to be online and for them to be using technology, particularly with a vaccine being introduced, then there may very well be some level of fall off in terms of use of technology. And people are kind of going back to their pre 2019 world. So that's going to be something super interesting. But I also like that you kind of touched on that cost factor in terms of how that could be hindering the full sort of digitization that we would really want to happen, to allow businesses to better kind of adapt some of these technology solutions. And I feel like the best way to start maybe tackling that is to get some of these businesses educated enough to kind of understand that technology adoption doesn't stop there, that technology adoption isn't necessarily digitization. It's not digitization. It's only really one pillar of that entire digitization process. But now you also have to look at how you kind of adapt your internal business structures, the people inside who have to work with that system and the processes that they also have to employ to make that system work. And I feel if they understood how those three pillars kind of support that digitization foundation, they can start doing little things to be able to make that shift to build better success for themselves. And it's we're talking about digital and we're talking about shifting online and online education. But this is also a great opportunity for them to understand that they could just, they could hashtag Google it.
Yeah.
They can go online. There's so many now free courses,
Yeah.
a lot of digital marketing folks, and I have to applaud the global digital marketing community, really stepped up and started to share information. There's so many free courses that you could find, so many great articles that talk about how to build a process, how to do it right, how you can, build an e-commerce system, set platforms up. And I think we've kind of moved into almost like a digital DIY system, where you could do it yourself, you could do it in house. And I think we could find some nice, easy, freemium opportunities to help folks who don't have that financial capacity to really implement big scale systems.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. In the last months, I've learned a lot from, for example, TikTok. It's not only for the fun, but people are sharing what they've learned and small things, how to use things in the house or everything. And I had an idea, yeah, some days ago. I think, hey, you have Netflix. Let me check if I can register the domain Schoolflix, and it is already there and full of information. So if you go to schoolflix.com, you see it is like a mall of education. um, and but I want to indeed, Giselle, what you're talking about, the business operation and those three pillars. I think that in the digital transformation, and I also made that mistake that if you're in a certain area, so you're technical, you're only focusing on those technological solutions.
Mhm.
But indeed, you had the right point on. We also have, let's say, as I say, almost the responsibility as private to educate our customer. What we've always was saying, but that as a business leader, you will have to go out of your comfort zone and check with your customer yourself, and it is from every customer. And that is also the thing about education, that in fact they are also like customers for us in the private, because they will come and work for the private sector. They start their own business or something. So um the thing is indeed, how will we make sure that our businesses, and when I talk our businesses, is indeed CARICOM wide, because I believe in CARICOM. So maybe we'll have to do something on support the CARICOM secretariat with those things, because um, maybe they need our help. I don't know,
Mhm. Mhm.
so but I think indeed is what we know for sure is that the after COVID period, it will not be the same as before 2019. So we'll have to go to hybrid systems in education, or in maybe also in selling or in doing
Mhm.
services. Um, so I am
Yes.
indeed, I'm wondering, I didn't hear from you about your view about CARICOM itself. What do you think about that whole CARICOM vibe, or system or operation with all those 16 countries together, or 14?
Oh, I feel like that's a question that that so many things can be unloaded onto, but I'm very much interested in seeing how systems work holistically. I think that just as we're talking about the education ecosystem and we're talking about business ecosystems, I think CARICOM itself it's not there yet, but I think it can be a very large um, cog in this whole Caribbean wheel that builds a better ecosystem. So the Caribbean needs to understand that we are one. People in the Caribbean, our Caribbean leaders. And I think once we kind of understand that as a collective, we are impacted by so many things outside of the Caribbean and so many things internal to the Caribbean. I feel like we need to start there to kind of unlock that kind of understanding. And then I think kind of then try, as with all things we've been talking about, maybe take a different approach, maybe shed some of the weight of the historical things that have impacted our growth and our unification, and try and take that CARICOM approach tackle that whole question of CARICOM and what is CARICOM and how CARICOM serves us as Caribbean people, Caribbean businesses, Caribbean education systems, all of those other component parts. But I think we need to take a fresh perspective, and I really do strongly believe that this we started COVID was the start of another revolution, and we have to start evolving. And sometimes it's not just growth from inside an existing organism, but maybe that organism needs to die and we need to be reborn and have new systems to sort of build in place for us to be able to facilitate all these sets of things. So I definitely think that, that's a good opportunity for us to kind of to move on. But I want to bring it back a little bit too to something that like I keep saying, it comes back to underlying strategies. What is the strategy for the education system, and what is also the strategy for businesses in this kind of environment? And we're talking about how fluid that education system needs to be, but also business systems really need to be a little bit more fluid, because what this means, what COVID meant in March, and what we started seeing from all around June, is that this thing wasn't going to be going away anytime soon, and we really needed to adapt. And while folks were kind of happy sitting and playing the waiting game, you can't. It's January 2021. It's not going away, so we have to really figure something out, and that something needs to be a more dynamic business strategy. So businesses have to really adjust their strategy and build something that's a little bit more fluid or flexible and able to manage with this kind of dynamic environment and this dynamic market that we're working with now.
Yes, I
Indeed.
totally agree on that.
Yes, I mean, Vincent, I am a regionalist, and certainly I do support CARICOM and what it aims to do. Granted, it does take a while for the machinery to actually
Mhm.
advance any situation. So I think that is something that they need to work on, because I think they start with good intentions, but circumstances overtake them, and then there's a whole question of relevance sometimes that comes into play. But Giselle, I wanted to just touch on this whole concept and the things that we're talking about in terms of just the fact that, for example, the digitalization is just one aspect. And I think that what came through for me when you were talking is the whole concept of the ecosystem and the fact that we're not thinking holistically.
Mhm.
But then I recognize though that the ecosystem itself is not as established or as inclusive as we would like it to be. So for example, if you had like some sort of business that sells a product, sells goods, yes, you might, when we were started to be affected by COVID-19, instead of having people come to your location, you would WhatsApp them or go on there.
Mhm.
You set up your platform on Facebook to still connect with your customers. But how do you get paid? You know, e-commerce is not as readily available and simple to secure for like micro, small, medium enterprises. And you then find that maybe the ability to just connect your whole sort of inventory and fulfillment and all of those sorts of things, which certainly a larger business would be able to do. These are some of the components that we can't always manage as small businesses. And so it really draws to my attention, or says, as much as we're talking about, oh well, sometimes we are not looking at things holistically. Yes, we did the quick and dirty, but we don't necessarily start to look at the bigger system and make the more probably longer term and more intensive changes that need to be made. But there could also be just the argument that the ecosystem to help us and to facilitate that is not where it needs to be.
Yes, yes, totally agree, Michelle. I think we have a lot of work to still be able to kind of build all of the supporting components of that, and that payment system gap is something that we really need to address. And I want to kind of go back to where we were talking about um, how we think that this is a ripe opportunity for the private sector to be able to innovate quickly and um, maybe even develop some of the solutions that can trickle down to some of these smaller entities that may not be able to afford some of these bigger payment solutions that might be available for larger enterprise businesses. And I think, it could be a good opportunity too for even for banks who are probably best positioned to, because they have all of the type of security structures to manage with these opportunities, to manage with the introduction of more robust payment systems that could be rolled out to smaller enterprises. I think that this is a huge opportunity for the financial sector to kind of champion this type of innovation and growth and to be able to support a lot of small businesses. I think it might be an interesting scenario heading into 2021. And I feel like we could be looking at some significant growth in the Caribbean where folks in the banking and finance sector, but even people adjacent to that and folks in technology who are really driving a lot of this growth since last year, who kind of step up and fill that gap with some solutions for us.
I definitely agree.
Yes, that's a big thing to tackle. I think it's a whole other podcast, Michelle. But
Yes,
it is indeed the ecosystem is but then again, I think that if I take Suriname for example, we are a very cash oriented economy, so people are, can you believe that some people don't believe that for example a digital, we had have and before COVID a lot of electronic wallets that were developed, and but then I if you ask people, they say they didn't how do you call it, trusted it yet. And I think it's also what we've mentioned in the whole ecosystem in is how we as Caribbean people are looking at things, and how are you going to change that. And COVID is here to help us, guide us in that digital thing. And we can discuss on, okay, is it good for us as a region or as people, or how we're going to cope with it. But it will not change, so we'll have to work on it. And I think it's here for the better of us, and think a little bit more as humans, because what I myself learned of COVID is that you can have all the money in the world, but if borders are closed, or you cannot travel, you sit at home in a with a curfew with all your money piled up, and you can do nothing. So and sometimes you cannot even see your family, because you will have to. You don't want your elderly get sick into in with COVID, because then you cannot. If they die alone. All of those things. So indeed, I think that this is a great conversation to start to look at it with the positive things we have as Caribbean people. We want to see each other. We are very social being. But what Giselle is talking also, business, look at the system, and how it will work, like with the strategy, and that is something I think we know we know the word strategy, but to implement it is a little bit a challenge for the Caribbean, I think.
Yes, yes.
yes. Let me just, since we probably need to be winding down, I have just one question. So, Vincent, I'll start with you, and then Giselle, if you can jump in and give your thoughts on it. So, here it is that we've been talking about, managing business operations, while they're shifting technologies. And, here it is that companies had adopted, technologies and services that they may not have done before. But what sort of advice would you give to, small businesses who made a quick shift to keep their business afloat last year. And now you're saying, okay, you have made some very minor changes, or you've made some significant changes. Now what? So what would you advise, Vincent?
For small businesses, I think that we'll have to go out of the survival mode. I know that a lot of businesses, and in Suriname, when you go into businesses, we don't have to learn on. We cannot fail, because failure in our society is a very big thing. You will be a failure, but that you will stay into that if you are staying in that survival mode. You will have to survive, and in doing that, you're forgetting that sometimes you will have to reach out to others to help you, you know or maybe make it much bigger. Sometimes you're reaching others that you give you help them, and it can be, yeah, sometimes it is maybe your something who's doing the same business, but if you're working together, it will be much bigger. It is not only one and one is two, but it is bigger than that. So my advice is, um, because COVID will stay, go out of the survival mode and try looking at the bigger picture and a longer term. And that is it is difficult. It is not that easy, because nobody wants to, let's say, make steps back, or nobody wants to, let's say, give a piece of your pie. But I believe that when working together, you're not dividing the pie, but you're growing the pie. So my advice, that will be my advice, and that's why I'm very happy with this regional podcast, because we'll have to look at it from a regional perspective.
Oh, Vincent, I'm here like mentally punching the air, saying yes. um, but I wholeheartedly agree that I think that's a solid approach to kind of help folks, kind of get over some of the hurdles and continue to move forward. And I think that what I want to say to small businesses is that it's not too late. That I also want to acknowledge the fact that they did a really good job. I think in looking at some of the examples that I've been seeing, hearing, reading about since last year, that Caribbean businesses adapted fairly quickly. They took charge of the situation. They jumped on. They used whatever technologies that they had, and some of them may have struggled, but others really tried to adapt and innovate quickly. And I want to applaud them for doing so. And I want to say that, you know, um, you are now in the best position to win. When you think about it, those bigger organizations, oil tankers, they're massive and they take a long time to turn. And smaller businesses are like little speedboats. They can make those quick turns and they can change gears and they could get to the finish line a lot faster. And I think that is what is needed in this type of environment. You need to be more fluid, more flexible, make faster decisions. And I think that even though they have gone in the right direction by trying to adapt and implement some tech solutions, that now that they can kind of recognize what is happening out there in the market, that they can start adapting smaller things with their business processes and their business strategies to keep moving toward that success finish line.
Yes, that's strong.
So is there any sort of clear steps that one would encourage?
Yeah, I definitely, Michelle, I definitely want to say that businesses, big or small, you have to start by taking a holistic approach. You have to sort of reassess your goals. You have to develop a new strategy for the business and to put the other pillars in place to support that system. So it's not just looking at looking at wanting to put that front end solution in place for the consumer, but also looking at what you need to tweak and what you need to implement on the back end so that you and your team might be able to work more efficiently to be able to meet those consumer needs. Because that end-to-end consumer experience, you don't want it to fall apart when you have a good technology on the front end, but on the back end, your processing system isn't keeping up. Your people are not working as fast to be able to deliver and to keep that system working. So definitely, I think that's what I want to say should happen. Start by taking that holistic approach and focus on your goals and redevelop the system to fit into those things.
Yes, I agree on that, and what I want to add on is that although indeed government will come and come with a lot of support, try to turn the table and go to your private other private maybe associations, because I think to do it holistically, if I may be honest, you don't need politics for that. They are not in Suriname or everywhere. Politics don't believe in that holistic approach. So we as private, we have to start the that movement, and and we have to work together with public. So don't get me wrong. I think it's a very nice synergy, but let we start that movement, so that holistic way of thinking. And indeed, we have the opportunity, because for small businesses it is easier to be flexible than those big corporation, indeed. So I totally agree on that.
And on that note, I think this thank you very much, Giselle and Vincent. This has been just a great conversation. I think that, as Giselle was talking, I was thinking of other things to ask and I had to restrain myself because clearly we have to draw this to a close today and probably consider part two at a later point in time, because I think even for the education one as well, again, questions were coming and things I could have asked and just continue the conversation for certainly another hour or so. So just thank you so much again for joining us, and just all the best going forward.
Yes, thank you
Oh,
for
great.
that.
Thank
Yes.
you so much, Michelle. Thank you so much, Vincent. Great, great conversations. Michelle, I'm booking all the slots in the calendar for you now for that part two.
Okay, same for me. And it is this we have to certainly go to part two and look at how we can make that difference for our region and ourselves. So thank you for the invitation, and I'm looking forward.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to the ICT Pulse podcast. You can find links to some of the things we talked about on our website, ict-pulse.com. If you like this episode, please show your support by leaving us a review on iTunes, as it will help others find the show. You can email us at info@ict-pulse.com or drop us a note on our Facebook page, facebook.com/ICTPulse, or via Twitter @ICTPulse. We hope you'll join us again for our next episode. Take care.